The warship Valkora moved in eerie silence across the dark stretch of interstellar nothing, its obsidian hull reflecting a ghostly shimmer from a dying red dwarf nearby. Inside, Commander Virella stood on the command deck like a blade unsheathed, elegant, sharp, impossible to ignore. Her silver armor caught the faint blue glow of the interface panels, accentuating every line of her battle-worn form. Long, pointed ears flicked slightly with each pulse of information, beaming into her neural HUD. Her species, the Athakari, valued precision above all else. Emotion was a luxury, one she hadn't indulged in since the first time she flew a gunship through a meteor storm without backup and lost half her unit. Now she had a new problem, one that didn't bleed, shoot back, or even appear remotely concerned about his own survival. A human, captured 3 cycles ago during a skirmish near the Serovian border. They called him Dalen. No last name, no rank. His data file was embarrassingly sparse, something Virella had not seen since the outdated dossiers on primitive rock-dwelling cultures. He had resisted no interrogation, fought no guards. Instead, he asked if they served decent coffee and requested a pillow that didn't feel like it was judging his neck. The interrogator had resigned an hour later. Now he was kneeling in front of her in the central hold, surrounded by armored guards in judgmental silence. "I said kneel," she repeated, stepping forward, voice like magnetized steel. Dalen blinked once, looked around at the towering aliens with their curved halberds and glowing armor, then slowly lowered himself to one knee, his head bowed, not in surrender, not in fear, but something else. There was a calmness to it, as though he had been waiting for this moment. "I mean, I don't mind the whole dramatic posture thing," he said, glancing up with a faint smile. "But usually there's music or fireworks. Little underwhelming, if I'm honest." There were several awkward coughs among the soldiers. Virella's eye twitched. "You obeyed," she said, more to herself than to him. "I figured it was polite. You've got a sword. I've got whatever this is," he said, holding up a loosely zip-tied wrist restraint that had been put on backwards. "Also, I just like the symmetry of this whole situation. You're tall, sparkly, vaguely terrifying, and I'm the court jester." "I am no court." "Then you've been robbed, because this place screams high-budget opera villain. Look at that ceiling design. Did someone install that just so it could loom ominously?" A muscle in her cheek twitched. Humor was a virus, and somehow he was spreading it through the ranks. "I could have you thrown into a cryo chamber until the next solar epoch," she said flatly. "Sure, but that sounds cold, and I have a skin condition called I hate ice." Virella narrowed her eyes. She had faced assassins, survived ambushes, and outwitted warlords. But this was a new kind of weapon, one that didn't strike, it disarmed. She turned to her lieutenant. "Put him in isolation, neural dampeners at minimum. I want to hear what he says when no one's laughing." As the guards escorted Dalen away, he glanced back at her, winked, and called out, "For the record, I kneel really well. It's the standing that gives me trouble." The doors hissed closed. Virella remained still. She stared at the space where he had been. No defiance, no resistance, just surrender with flair. She hated how curious that made her feel. The isolation cell was carved into the lower decks of the Valkyra, a place where light refused to linger. Its walls pulsed gently with an eerie blue rhythm, designed to disturb circadian patterns and disorient memory. For most prisoners, it was a descent into sensory madness. But for Dalen, it was just boring, which in his opinion was worse. He sat cross-legged in the center of the hexagonal chamber, tapping the rhythm of an old Earth song against the floor with one knuckle. The neural dampeners buzzed faintly above him, barely suppressing thought. Likely a test, or a mistake. He hadn't decided which yet. When the door hissed open, Dalen looked up with mock anticipation. "Room service. I ordered existential dread with a side of philosophical crisis." Commander Virella stepped through, alone. No guards, no translator. Just her and the tension she carried like a blade across her back. Her long ears twitched once as the door sealed shut behind her. "You're too relaxed," she said, "and you're too tall to sneak up on people. But here we are." She ignored that. You defy expectations. Even now your pulse is steady. Your neural patterns show no fear. Fun fact, I once took a nap during a missile strike. Noise helps me sleep. You're mocking me. Would you prefer screaming? Because I can do that, but I'll need a warm-up. Virella's mouth twitched at the corners, as if debating the rules of smiling in uniform. She approached slowly, boots silent against the alloy floor. I've interrogated species that could fold time, she said, crouching to meet him at eye level. I've seen telepaths melt into madness under our dampeners. And yet you complained about the pillows. Yeah, I'm a walking disappointment. I'm beginning to believe that's your weapon. What, sarcasm? Well, it's not sharp, but it gets under the skin. Silence passed between them. For the first time, Virella noticed how human his face really was. Not threatening, not defiant, just there, watching her like she was a puzzle, not an enemy. His dark eyes flicked briefly to her ears. You know, he said, on my world, ears like that would make you an elite fantasy character. They mark our lineage, genetic nobility. Mine stick out when I'm cold. Very noble. A reluctant breath escaped her. Not quite a laugh. Not quite not. I've read your military file, she said at last. You're nobody. No rank, no ship, no known assignments. I'm a freelancer, galactic drifter, collector of interesting rooms and awkward conversations. No one is that unimportant. Not in a war zone. You'd be surprised how easy it is to be overlooked when you're wearing a busted flight suit and carrying a sarcasm engine instead of a weapon. Why were you in the Serovian perimeter? Chasing a radio signal. Thought it was a distress beacon. Turned out to be a music loop someone rigged as a prank. Never gonna give you up. Your species really needs to look that up. She stared at him. I risked my life for an ancient Earth joke, he added. If that doesn't scream heroism, I don't know what does. Virella stood. You make no sense. Correct. That's how I stay alive. You should be terrified. Should be. But then I'd miss out on your charming company. For a moment she studied him like one might study a blade pretending to be a spoon. Deceptive. Dangerous. Not yet fully understood. I'll be observing you further, she said, turning toward the door. Oh, good, Dalen replied cheerfully. Does that come with popcorn? She paused mid-step, her back to him, her voice lowered just enough to blur certainty. You're the first human I've met who doesn't fear me. Dalen tilted his head. Maybe I just don't fear the right things. The door hissed open. She disappeared into the corridor beyond. Alone again, Dalen lay back on the cold floor and stared at the blinking lights overhead. Or maybe, he whispered to himself, I've just been waiting for someone like you. The Valkora moved through the velar expanse with all the grace of a predator conserving its energy. Silent, immense, unknowable to the untrained eye. In its core, beneath decks layered with quantum plating and humming magnetic arteries, Dellen had been moved from isolation to what Virella called a controlled access environment. He called it a slightly larger prison with worse snacks. It was a glass-paneled chamber embedded within the observation deck, a bizarre mix of imprisonment and panoramic luxury. Beyond the clear partition, stars spilled across the void like powdered jewels. Virella was there again, seated in the command lounge just outside the enclosure. She sipped a translucent green liquid from a tall vessel, something native to her world that she assured him had once paralyzed a diplomat for 12 hours. Dalen sipped his rationed water and tried not to feel competitive. You requested a view, she said without looking at him. I requested a cheeseburger and a decent mattress, he replied, but this is a close second. You talk much for a prisoner. Some people scream, I banter, healthier for the lungs. She turned to him, silver armor catching the light of passing starlight. Do you think humor shields you? Not shields, umbrellas. Useless against lasers, but decent in social rainstorms. That earned a flicker of amusement across her features. It passed quickly, but he caught it. I've reviewed the footage from the skirmish you were found in, she said. 3 Athakar warships disabled. You were floating in the wreckage of a cargo freighter without weapons, without allies, but with active navigation still engaged. Dalen leaned back on his cot, hands behind his head. You say it like it's suspicious. Maybe I'm just really lucky. Luck doesn't explain the encrypted beacon pulsing from your suit. He gave her an exaggerated shrug. That? Just in case I misplaced my socks. She rose, moving toward the interface console on her side of the glass. Her long fingers danced over the controls with precision. A projection shimmered to life between them, an image of a signal pattern. Complex, purposeful, human-coded, but buried in a lattice of artificial temporal folds. Varela arched one long brow. Explain. I'd love to, but I'm contractually obligated to be mysterious. You're not a soldier, she said, but someone trusted you with this. That's the thing about trust, he said, his voice suddenly less flippant. You don't always earn it by being the biggest gun in the room. There was a pause, strange and taut. Not tense, just uncertain. Varela deactivated the projection and stepped closer to the glass. Her gaze locked with his through the barrier. I've known humans to be impulsive, stubborn, and irrational, but not unreadable. You confuse my instincts. High praise from someone with ears that twitch every time I make a pun. They do not twitch. They twitched. Don't deny it. I'm documenting this for science. She turned, walking away, clearly done. But before reaching the corridor door, she paused. I have read your world's literature, she said over her shoulder. One story stood out. A man tells jokes to a queen until she falls in love with him? He blinked. That's not a bad gig. The queen executed him at dawn. Oh, bit of a tone shift there. I appreciate patterns, she said, stepping out of view. I'll be watching to see if you repeat that one. Left alone again, Dalen sat forward, elbows on knees, staring at the faint imprint her presence left in the air. He wasn't sure what game they were playing anymore, but whatever it was, he was starting to enjoy it. Maybe too much. Still, part of him remained wary. The beacon she'd discovered wasn't a prank, and if she dug deeper, she'd find the truth he wasn't ready to share. Not yet. Not until he knew if she was part of the problem or the solution. Above, the stars swirled like ancient secrets, and Dalen smiled. Because if he was going to risk everything, it might as well be for a woman with war in her eyes and twitchy ears. The ship's gravity shifted briefly, a sign they were altering course. Somewhere beyond the steel bones of the Volcora, its pulse engines flexed against the pull of a microsingularity, riding its edges like a surfer on a black tide. Inside, the lights dimmed to a twilight hue as the ship slipped into stealth mode. Varela's orders. Something was coming, something she hadn't yet explained. Dalen felt it in the hum of the floor beneath his boots. That low thrum had been his constant companion for days now, more familiar than sleep. He stood inside his transparent enclosure, arms crossed, watching Varela through the glass as she read data streaming across her arm display. Her ears, alert and slightly angled back, twitched with each new update. So, he said casually, on a scale from routine detour to imminent explosion, how worried should I be? She didn't look up. We're approaching a signal source. Unknown origin, cloaked, unregistered signature. Could be a ghost beacon. Could be a trap. Could be a floating space diner playing jazz. Highly unlikely. Sure, but wouldn't that be a pleasant surprise? Varela finally met his eyes, her expression unreadable. We've traced echoes of that same beacon you were transmitting. This time stronger. Not just a loop. This one's dynamic. Dalen's posture stiffened slightly, the humor faltering a beat. And you're going toward it. That's what warships do. Even when it might be a human-designed ambush. She took a step closer to the glass. Especially then. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she raised a hand and entered a code into the console. A soft chime sounded, and the wall of the enclosure shimmered before vanishing. No force field, no barriers, just open air between them. Dalen looked around, eyebrows raised. So, we're going with the trust the mysterious guy with a sarcastic mouth and unknown loyalties approach? You're not armed, she said. I'm charming. That's more dangerous. I'll take the risk, she replied, motioning him forward. You'll accompany me to the signal. I assume I'm not getting a uniform. You'd wrinkle it. They moved together through the corridor, her stride precise and commanding, his more relaxed, almost like he was out for a stroll through a hostile space fortress, which, in fairness, he was. They passed soldiers who stiffened at the sight of him, but Virella waved them off with the calm of someone who didn't need to explain herself. The hangar bay opened to reveal a sleek, two-seat scout vessel prepped and waiting. It was needle-shaped and coated with adaptive light panels that shimmered with starlight. Dallin ran a hand along its cool hull. "Nice ride," he muttered. "Yours?" "Yours for today," she said, climbing into the pilot's seat. He paused. "Wait, I'm flying?" "You trace the last signal. You'll recognize the pattern faster." He raised a skeptical brow. "You do realize this could be an elaborate human trap, and I might be the bait, right?" "If it is," she said as the canopy sealed around them, "then it's a trap I want to spring with my own hands." Moments later, the scout detached with a faint hiss and streaked silently into the void. Inside the cockpit, the only sound was the pulse of nearby radiation and the quiet flick of instruments. Dallin adjusted their vector toward the signal source. As they passed through a nebula veil, strange bioluminescent clouds clung briefly to the hull, swirling like jellyfish trying to understand metal. "So," he said, eyes on the scanner, "you always do your own recon, or am I just that charming? You ask too many questions. That's how humans survive. We ask, we guess, we occasionally run. But mostly, we charm death into giving us another chance." Virella smirked faintly, watching the stars twist ahead. "If this is your idea of charm, I pity the species." Dallin's scanner pinged once, then again. Stronger. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "There it is." "What do you see?" "Something old," he said slowly, "and definitely not Athakar tech." The signal was coming from a drifting structure, half submerged in the gas cloud. It looked like a cathedral had been fused with a satellite dish and then abandoned for centuries. Metal spires jutted out at odd angles, wrapped in energy coils that pulsed faintly with residual power. Dallin stared. Virella's ears twitched. Neither of them spoke, because for the first time both knew this wasn't just a message. It was an invitation. The scout vessel drifted silently closer to the derelict construct, its adaptive hull blending with the surrounding mist of the nebula. Tendrils of pale gas curled around the ship like curious ghosts, brushing softly against the viewing canopy before fading into darkness. Inside the cockpit, the light from the drifting structure flickered across Dallin's face, casting odd shadows that didn't quite match the angles of his features. Virella kept her hands on the controls, though she had already activated auto-hover. Her eyes remained fixed on the structure, tall, jagged, and wrapped in coils of ancient machinery that pulsed with a slow, breathing rhythm. No weapon systems, no beacon now, just the silence of something waiting to be remembered. "I'm going to say something very unscientific," Dallin muttered. "That place is humming in my bones." "You feel the harmonics," Virella said softly. "It's vibrating at a near subconscious frequency, designed to influence biology." "Wonderful. Mind control cathedral. That's always a crowd pleaser." She glanced at him. "The signal embedded in your suit, it matches this structure's waveform. Then I'd like to formally declare I know nothing and was probably hacked by a really elegant alien spam email." Despite the quip, he didn't move. His gaze was locked on the structure. His breath had slowed. Somewhere deep in his memories, something stirred. A dream, perhaps. A conversation he couldn't place. A voice whispering beneath static. Without speaking, Virella disengaged the mag seal hatch. The ship's docking ring extended toward a narrow port on the structure's side, one that opened as if it had been expecting them. No signal, no transmission, just obedience. They stepped into the airlock together. Inside, gravity adjusted unnaturally fast, sinking with their bodies before they even hit the floor. The corridor beyond was dim, lined with curved walls etched in a script neither of them recognized. Pale lights flickered on with their footsteps. Dallin ran a hand along one of the walls. "It's not metal. It's warm." "Organic alloy," Virella said, scanning with her wrist console. "Laced with memory fibers. This place is alive in a way." Further in, they entered a dome-like chamber where floating symbols danced in midair, forming and unforming like snowflakes of data. At the center was a pedestal, Upon it rested a small, hexagonal device. Dalin's steps slowed. He moved toward it like he was being pulled. Varela reached for her sidearm. Dalin, I know this, he said, voice quiet. I've seen this. Where? In my dreams. Ever since I found that signal. I didn't tell you because I didn't think it meant anything. He touched the device. It responded instantly, shifting its shape like a puzzle solving itself. Lines of light raced across the chamber, activating panels in the walls, illuminating the script. The air filled with a resonant hum, not threatening, not hostile, just vast. A projection blinked into existence. Not a face, not a voice, but a sequence. Planets, coordinates, flashes of ancient architecture, images of species long gone, others still known, and finally a symbol, a spiral wrapped in wings. Varela stepped forward. This is a navigation map, a network, but it predates our records by millennia. It's not just a map, Dalin said. It's a call. This was left for someone to follow, and now it's pointing to the next step. She stared at him. And you think that someone is you? He looked back unsure. I think I was given the signal, for a reason. Maybe I'm a courier. Maybe I'm just the first idiot to listen. But something's waking up, and it wants someone to notice. The chamber dimmed again, the map retracting, as if satisfied for now. The device returned to its original form and sank into the pedestal. Varela turned toward the exit, her expression unusually thoughtful. This changes things. Dalin followed slowly, eyes lingering on the walls. Yeah, and I have a feeling we're not going to like what it's changing into. As they walked back to the scout vessel, the structure sealed behind them without a sound. No alarm, no resistance. Just a quiet promise. It would wait for their return. The return to the Valcora was marked by a silence so thick it felt like part of the ship's atmosphere. No chatter on the comms, no questions from the deck officers. The crew watched with the kind of rigid discipline that didn't come from protocol. It came from confusion wrapped in quiet fear. Varela walked ahead, her steps calculated, thoughts turning like gravity-locked satellites around the structure they just left behind. Dalin followed, uncharacteristically wordless, his usual lightness buried beneath layers of questions he wasn't ready to ask aloud. Back in her private briefing chamber, walls flickering with encrypted data streams and heat-mapped galactic overlays, Varela stood before a display showing the ancient structure's projection again. The winged spiral hovered in the air like a challenge waiting to be accepted. Navigation nodes, 5 of them, she said, all placed near major void corridors, all equidistant from known hyperlanes. This was built by a civilization that didn't just map space, they shaped how it was traveled. Dalin leaned against a console, arms folded, which raises the question, why hide it? Why bury the signal behind layers of decay and ghost code? Because it wasn't meant for everyone, Varela replied, only those who could hear it. And what happens when someone listens? He asked. They arrive. Varela's tone was calm, but her eyes held storms. She had already begun requesting files, issuing silent commands through neural interface links. The room vibrated faintly with the soft hum of encrypted commands bouncing off deep space relays. Dalin pointed to the wing spiral. You've seen that symbol before, haven't you? Yes, she said after a moment. Once, buried in the archives of the old Dominion Wars. It was carved into the ruins on a moon we glassed. No atmosphere, no life. But the symbol was untouched. Even our orbital strikes couldn't burn it away. He whistled softly. Now that's good branding. Varela turned, arms crossed, studying him. You're handling this better than expected. Because I'm not sure it's real yet. Feels like I'm stuck in a particularly elaborate lucid dream with excellent production value. You may not have the luxury of disbelief much longer. At that moment, a soft chime echoed. A priority ping, internal. Varela frowned, gestured, and the transmission unfurled in midair. A face appeared. Sharp, clean. Athakar, but not military. Regal uniform, golden trim. Her ears were longer, her voice colder. Commander Varela, this is High Emissary Olivan. You've breached diplomatic protocols by approaching restricted sectors. Return immediately for formal inquest. Virella didn't blink. I operate under autonomous authority granted by War Mandate Zeta. The mandate was revoked 37 cycles ago. You are no longer in command of the Valkora. The words landed with finality. Dalen straightened. Oh, good, he muttered. A hostile takeover. I was starting to miss drama. The transmission ended. Virella didn't move. Then she turned and opened a secure cabinet behind her console. Inside, a sleek containment case, glowing faintly with embedded encryption runes. She keyed it open, revealing an old weapon. An Athakar command blade, given only to field leaders during wartime. She clipped it to her side like it belonged there, as natural as a heartbeat. Let me guess, Dalen said. You're not going back. No, she said. I'm going forward. And where exactly is forward? She looked at the spiral. There are 5 more beacons. We wake them, or someone else will. And I don't trust what they'll do with that kind of map. Dalen stepped forward, watching her carefully. You're abandoning your post? They'll brand you a traitor. She gave him a wry look. I've been called worse. And me? He asked. You're a civilian with questionable diplomatic status and access to ancient tech. Congratulations. You're now my science advisor. He laughed once, shaking his head. You're not serious. I've never been more serious. The deck shuddered faintly beneath them. Virella tapped her wrist. Bridge, prepare the Valkora for shadow transit. Set course for the 2nd beacon. Dalen glanced at the spiral again as it dimmed, replaced by coordinates only 3 civilizations had ever mapped. Well, he muttered, I guess we're officially off the map now. Virella gave a rare smile. That's where all the interesting things happen. The Valkora drifted through the dark fringe of the Obscythe Veil, where stars blinked faintly behind curling clouds of ion dust, and gravitational anomalies whispered across time, like forgotten voices. Her hull bore new scars, burn marks, plasma streaks, melted plating, earned over 6 weeks of unauthorized jumps, black site skirmishes, and contact with forces no Dominion archive had ever dared to document. She was no longer a warship. She was something else now, a vessel of discovery, or perhaps defiance. Inside, the once orderly command deck had changed too. Uniforms had grown loose. Protocols had relaxed. The crew didn't march. They moved with purpose. Orders came more from trust than fear. And at the center of it all stood Virella, not stripped of her title, but having grown past it. Her armor remained, but now it bore the symbol of the winged spiral, etched into the plating just above her heart. They had activated 4 more beacons, each one stranger than the last, floating relics built with forgotten science, designed not just to guide, but to test. One of them had responded only to Dalen's voice. Another required them to survive a simulated war with themselves. A reflection of fear turned into living code. The 4th had no light, only a void. And when they emerged, Virella no longer doubted that the creators had known what lay far beyond the galactic rim. Now the final beacon loomed before them. It did not drift, did not sleep. It waited. Embedded in the core of a dead system, the structure was unlike the others. It was not elegant. It was not quiet. It pulsed with energy that bled into the void like a beating heart, too large for its vessel. Virella and Dalen stood in the bridge's forward alcove as the beacon unfolded itself, 6 great arms reaching out to the stars, forming a geometric lattice in space. The last map bloomed above them, larger than anything they'd seen. The spiral glowed bright at its center. Dalen turned to her. You realize we just created the galaxy's most complicated treasure hunt, right? Virella didn't answer immediately. She was watching the stars rearrange themselves in the map's logic, constellations bending, histories rewritten by coordinates. This is what the Dominion feared, she said. Not war, not chaos, but truth, that they are not the first and not the last. He stepped closer, voice quiet. Do you think we were supposed to find this? You and me? I think, she said, turning to him, that the galaxy's been waiting for someone willing to find it. Behind them, the crew watched, some in awe, others in silence. There was no need for speeches. They knew. They had crossed a threshold few would ever approach. Not because they were chosen, but because they had chosen themselves. The map began to shrink, compacting, aligning itself to the ship's nav systems. A final coordinate shimmered into place. No planet, no star, just an anomaly, a point in space where even light refused to go. Varela didn't flinch. Plot a course. Dalen raised an eyebrow. Into the unknown? Isn't that where you always wanted to go? He smiled. Only if I get to tell the story afterward. As the crew moved into action, the Valkora shifted toward the anomaly. Its engines pulsed, lights along the hull activating one by one in a ritual older than language. The stars thinned. The hum of the ship changed pitch. Space bent. In that moment, Varela stood still, hands clasped behind her back, eyes fixed ahead. The weight of command had become something else entirely. She no longer fought for power or territory. She fought to open a door no one had dared to approach. Beside her, Dalen exhaled slowly. He had begun as a prisoner, then a curiosity, then a question. But now he stood with purpose, no longer the jester in the Queen's court, but the echo in her silence. The one who had waited to kneel not out of obedience, but recognition. The ship entered the dark, and somewhere beyond time, something ancient opened its eyes.